A question that's often asked is faith opposed to ration? There's this idea that somehow your spiritual life or your faith must be separated or compartmentalized from your intellect, your brain, from logic and ration, because on some level these things must be opposed. And so on a practical level, people think something like this: when I come to church, do I have to check my brain at the door when I walk in? And some people wonder, is it ungodly, unspiritual to ask tough questions, to wrestle with spiritual issues, and even to doubt? Well, you see, I think the confusion comes when we misunderstand the nature of faith. And I think it'd be helpful to see how the Bible actually defines faith itself. Look what it says in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11 and verse 1. It says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." So the Bible recognizes that faith, that spirituality, it's dealing with things that you can't see. But what does it call for? It says that we are dealing with substance. We are dealing with evidence. You see, the Bible never calls us to blind faith, because faith is not the blind acceptance of claims or beliefs based on feelings, but it is the reasonable conclusion based on evidence. God never calls us to believe things that are unreasonable. What he calls us to is to examine the evidence and then put our faith where the evidence leads. We see this played out in a couple of different verses in the Bible. It's interesting, in the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah, chapter 1 and verse 18, the Lord is talking, and here's what he says. He says, "Come now, let us reason together." Now think about that. That is God talking, and he tells us when we come to him, he says, let's reason, let's think, let's work this through. God doesn't say, hey, just come and just accept me. He says, come, let us reason together. And so that's why it makes sense when you come to the New Testament and you see how the apostles worked when it came to faith. Look in the book of Acts, chapter 18 and verse 4. It's describing the ministry of the apostle Paul, and here's what it says that he did. It says that every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogues, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. It doesn't say that he went to the synagogues and tried to appeal to their heartstrings or to their emotions or just said, hey, just trust me. No, it said he reasoned with them. And this should teach us something. This should teach us that God is not afraid of or offended by our questions or even our doubts. He created our minds, and he wants us to use our minds. That's why God says, okay, when you come to me, reason with me. When the Apostle Paul was trying to explain spiritual issues to people, he reasoned with them. So what that should teach us is this, that it's okay to research, to ask the tough questions when it comes to faith. That's not a sign of being ungodly or unspiritual. It's a sign that you understand the nature of faith, which is to follow the evidence. But with that being said, remember to keep this one thing in mind. When it comes to faith, it operates more like a courtroom than it does a science lab. Here's what I mean by that. You see, God cannot be controlled or duplicated like in a science experiment. That's what you do with the scientific method. You control all of the aspects of the experiment, and then you see if you can duplicate the same results, thus proving a scientific theory. But that's not how you prove spiritual matters. Instead, you can prove spiritual matters like you do in a court of law, by presenting evidence, examining the evidence, and then seeing where the evidence leads. And in the court of law, something can be proven by the preponderance of evidence. And what you'll discover is when you look into God, the preponderance of evidence leads to the overwhelming conclusion that he is who he claimed to be, and he operates the way he claims to operate in his word, the Bible. So go ahead and why don't you pause for a minute and think about these questions.